The idea of false prophets, I think, was much more popularized before, but I'm just getting to my notes now. Even if you're not in the like religious or spiritual space, I think this is going to also go for just like negative and leaders who just like do not have your best interest at heart. It's really challenging because like part of this conversation is, understanding what is truth and what is not. And I think that that's a really loaded word, but out of all, like, after all of the work that I have done, my definition of truth is the like objectivity of it, like the ability to see something from a third person perspective or a bird's eye view, to be able to capture any and all perspectives, like to have that ability. That's kind of what I feel truth is. So we're going to work with that. Okay, so the first one is that false prophets are just like bad leaders. They don't really have any resonation. You just like feel this inherent disconnect when they are talking. Now, if you're in like a cult like scenario where you feel like you're being brainwashed, like over time it's going to be substantially more difficult to like comprehend and understand that what you are experiencing and feeling is not connection, right? So like this is just really important and pivotal in the start of you kind of following someone, so to speak. This could be a social media influencer, you know for all intents and purposes. This is something that really you kind of feel like in your heart with your gut instinct. So this is why intuition building is so important. Next is how they talk about empowerment, but they always still maintain control. So there's going to be really obvious ways that this is going to be illustrated, right, or illuminated, where it's just conversation, but there's not really a lot of physical action or activity to back it up. The other thing is that like there could just be offered like false senses of control, right? Like, oh, you can manage this little project, or you can have like this kind of impact. But when you pull yourself back, when you take a look at that bird's eye view, you're realizing that the impact that you have is pretty negligible. Obviously, in like really negative, bad situations, like this would mean that the person, such as yourself, whoever is in this situation, trying to resonate with this list, like they do not have full autonomy over their body and their experiences. And so it's going to be a problem. I do feel like in a lot of situation, the reign of this particular person or this establishment, it's either very short-lived or it can deteriorate quite rapidly. And here's what's really interesting about that. Like, I think there are situations where like organizations have been able to, or individuals have been able to rebuild, but it kind of just seems like in about 5 seconds, they're going down again. This is a really hard topic because I do feel like, in general, the whole point of us being here is to make mistakes and make errors, but then you can kind of look at it from this perspective and point of view. Someone is trying to get something out of you. They're not going to have a lot of patience to kind of like see it through. So if things are feeling just very like fast and quick and you need to do something and you do it fast and like, I don't know, it almost can feel like things are spiraling out of control. That's not going to be a good sign. So, definitely in a cult-like scenario, there's going to be situations where, this person, this false prophet, claims to know information that other people don't. Now, this can be like a really extreme situation, but this can also manifest in different ways. So, like, if there is a leader that like is kind of withholding information, and maybe they kind of are just like, oh, well, it's just like privy for me to know. That's kind of doing the same thing. And it also just like ladders back to the retaining a sense of control. But like information in general, I feel like is very weaponized, low key, even in like workplace situations. I think that's kind of a big one, to be honest. Okay, so we all know this one, and it's excusing behavior with circular logic or reasoning. I feel like we see this a lot of times in politics where, people are not necessarily like answering the question, or like the answer, like it just like goes in a circle. Like nothing ever really seems to get done. Nothing kind of goes out there. There may be a lack of vulnerability from the leader in general. And it's just like, I don't know, it just like ain't working. But yeah, I think that there always needs to be like this sense of retaining like self-preservation, right? And like remaining slightly stagnant, because if there's too much evolution, then that leader is going to lose control over the situation. And yeah, things kind of like need to go quite slowly-ish. I know this is kind of like anti the other sentiment where like things are quite going fast, but like I think it more so has to do with that person versus them versus that person, like where things are slow and where things can kind of speed up. Okay, so recommending cutting ties with previous life or like prior life or other people. Obviously, we see this a lot in negative, um, you know, like abusive relationships essentially, but like how can this be something which is actually like low key maybe happening to you? It might not necessarily be like about the past, but if you are a part of a workplace that like kind of isolates you, I guess, in general, in terms of not even like fraternizing with other people, places, or things, but just sort of like it's all about us type of vibe. Like it's yes, there's like kind of like a faux collaborative spirit, but like we're like low key the best and like we're prioritizing ourselves. And I know and understand that like you kind of have to, right? Who else is going to do it for you? But I think there's like a differentiation with either like sort of an inflated ego or sense of self, or that no matter what, like, you know, even though we kind of falsify this collaborative spirit, like it's still about us at the end of the day, no matter what. Okay, so recommending like behaviors or rituals which are kind of odd. I think that, any sort of documentary you've ever seen, like a lot of times followers are just doing things which are pushing their boundaries and making themselves like really uncomfortable. And so, um, yeah, I think that that can be like quite obvious, but also, you know, this can be like a little bit like more low key, I think. And the struggle with this is that like you do need to make yourself uncomfortable like as a person to learn, evolve and grow, but there's there's a line there and there's a gut instinct there where it's like is this for my own is this fostering my own sense of self evolution and growth, or is that being kind of like trampled over and nullified and it's actually discussing like the evolution and growth of this leader, right? Like is it only kind of about them or about the establishment? So I think it really just like takes a level of intuition to understand, okay, I'm like facing my fears and I'm going to better myself versus I'm like really uncomfortable, but like this is for the betterment of anyone and everybody else. Understandably, like sometimes we have to do that when we have connections and relationships with other folks, but I think it's about the amount of times that it's happening and of course like how far over the boundaries it is. Like obviously in a perfect world, no one like tramples over your boundaries, but I do feel like it's just like a natural part of human life that it's a little bit blurred or gray sometimes. The other two are hoarding of wealth and material possessions. That's actually like very self-explanatory, so not much to describe there. Yeah. So here's the other interesting one. It's extremism in general. I think that being an extremist does like a couple of different things. It does foster a sense of chaos and like natural disconnection in general, especially if you have like so many different rules and boundaries and things of that nature. Like weirdly on the other hand, if you have like no boundaries, that is also not entirely great. But the extremist like philosophy and point of view is so siloed and rigid. I think it just like automatically makes people have a sense of uptightness and anxiety, and as a result just like more eager to please, you know what I mean? And the struggle is that this isn't always like made known immediately, so this is something that can kind of just like slowly show up over time. There's definitely like this stigma of kind of like the male false prophet, like I'm not gonna lie. And I was just kind of curious thinking about that. I'm like, why is that the case? Like, why does it seem like there's not very many female false prophets? There are, don't get me wrong, there are, but it just seems like there's less so, and there's more of an interest in capitalizing on like growth and investment and money and material things like from male false prophets. So I'm not like calling that out as like a thing, but I'm just using that as an example to extrapolate a bigger and a larger point, which is that um I feel like with divine femininity channeling comes very, very easy, right? Like those ambiguous arts are quite easy, and more of the difficulty comes with resonating with physical things, which could be kind of like integrating into society or integrating into relationships or people management, things like that. And that's not to say it's a weakness, it's just like a little bit more of a challenge in general. So with divine masculinity, it's going to be the opposite. The channeling is actually going to be a little bit more challenging, and the physical integration is going to be a little bit easier. Okay, what does that mean? It simply means that divine femininity would be less likely to have a warped relationship with the physical integration, meaning people and the management of people. And divine masculinity would prioritize the channeling over the people management, and it would essentially be swapped. This is not to say that divine femininity and females cannot, psychologically manipulate you. Like, I think that's a pretty well-known thing. But when we're talking about channeling specifically, I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting observation overall. Point being, you are going to want someone who is not prioritizing the channeling over, the people. And don't get me wrong, if you're just like, I'm a diehard channeler, I don't care how this gets out to the people, I don't care how it's integrated, great, amazing. But stay out of the cult space. Like, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, don't bring people under your leadership if that is the case. So don't bring people under your leadership if that is the case. So I think there's like ways in which all of these things can like exist in a healthy way, but you know, overly divine masculine, overly emphasizing the channeling, not emphasizing the people connection, management, organization enough, you're going to get a really weird set of circumstances. It's hard because, again, it's like, is every single perspective right? Like, I think that philosophically, I do kind of get caught up in that idea and that concept. Like, who is anybody to say what is like right or wrong, and what could be truth resonation for me could kind of be different for other people. But I think that in a time when there's so much information, there's so much regurgitation, there's so much AI, this is just like a worthwhile conversation to have, because there can always be improvements with intuition alignment and understanding the energy dynamics and the metaphysics of things going on. Yes, it is true you may not be susceptible to being in a cult, but could you be susceptible to a very negative, abusive workplace situation, relationship dynamic with your, family of birth, or relationship dynamic with your significant other, or really anything and everything? The answer is yes. I think that that is something that people commonly find themselves in, in different seasons of their life. And so understanding these signs and symbols of what is probably, I guess I could say, an unhealthy dynamic, but primarily more so energetically motivated by the other like the other organization, the other establishment, the other person versus you, probably imperative. I don't know. Just have a think about these things. I think that, again, things are a little bit more complicated, but hopefully this can provide some insight.